Martin glanced around the gazebo. Faces lit by the amber glow of the lantern overhead were frozen in the half-light. Cicadas chirred loudly, and the evening air, still warm from the day's heat, carried the scent of freshly cut grass. Across from him sat Absalom, a tall, broad-shouldered old man with a thick beard and deep-set eyes. He was the founder and leader of the Vale, and the way the commune members had gathered the moment he called for them told Martin all he needed to know about Absalom's authority. T.O. Absalom's right sat a wiry man in his 40s with a convict's look, legs spread wide, eyes locked on Martin. Faded tattoos snaked over his fingers, and his scarred, knobby skull gleamed under the lantern light. His name, Martin thought, was Osmond, and from what he'd gathered, Osmond acted as the commune's enforcer, carrying out Absalom's will. The others at the meeting were two young men and two women, all about Martin's age. They sat on the bench like damp sparrows in the rain, withdrawn and indifferent. Martin hadn't spoken to them and didn't particularly want to. He'd seen their kind before in countless group therapy sessions over the past year. Lost souls, turned inward, staring at the void within. A year of failed attempts to quit. And now, another one. "Tell us about yourself," Absalom said gently. Martin crossed his arms and barely suppressed a bitter smile. He'd recited his story to doctors and psychologists so many times it felt like reading from a worn-out script. "I got hooked on the blend 5 years ago. Back then it was still legal." He glanced at the circle, but only Absalom and Osmond seemed to be paying attention. "At first I thought I had it under control. I'd smoke once or twice a week after work to unwind. I was working as a manager in an office, and the stress was unbearable. The stuff helped me relax. Before I knew it, I was using every day, morning, at work, after work. I'd wake up in the middle of the night just to smoke. Otherwise, I couldn't sleep. Then the numbness came. I stopped caring about anything. Lost my job, my friends, fought with my parents. Same old story. All I thought about was the next hit. Eventually, the pain started. My joints, muscles, heart, constant agony." Martin paused for breath. He was nearing the part he always tried to skip, the part that never got easier to say. But Absalom, as if sensing his hesitation, pressed softly. "What made you change?" Martin swallowed hard and shifted on the bench. There was a moment, a breaking point. "I knew I had to quit. I tried to do it on my own, but I kept relapsing. I told my parents everything. After that, it was detox after detox, clinic after clinic. Sometimes I'd stay clean for a week or two, maybe a month, but I'd always fall back. Then my father heard about the Vale and brought me here." He remembered the long road to the commune. Absalom, once a respected addiction specialist, now a religious recluse, had founded the settlement deep in the northern woods. It had taken 6 hours to reach Lindsberg, then another 50 kilometers down a crumbling highway flanked by overgrown fields and abandoned farms, then a slow crawl through dense forest along a dirt track. The road ended at a derelict farm where Absalom met them. Martin had surrendered his phone, part of the admission terms, and said a brief goodbye to his father before boarding Absalom's boat. They crossed the river, its far bank choked with reeds, and docked in silence. Absalom took his time, climbing a nearby hill and burying a couple of fuel canisters in a hidden cache, then led Martin down a narrow trail through the underbrush. The sun hung low and red behind the trees as a crooked village emerged ahead, a forgotten settlement where Absalom had built his commune for recovering addicts. "Now you're one of us," Absalom said, eyes narrowing with a smile. "Welcome to the Vale. You must have heard of our success, or you wouldn't be here. Martin, there's one thing you need to understand. You can't heal without constant work. But if you ever falter, know that we'll be here to support you. I, Elder Osmond, your brothers and sisters." Absalom swept his hand toward the others, and for the first time, they looked directly at Martin. Suspicious, cautious gazes. Except for one, a skinny brunette in a denim jacket. In her eyes, he saw the faintest spark of curiosity. "Labor, prayer, and self-reflection," Absalom went on, "are the pillars of full recovery. Only through them will you ever be free of your addiction. Martin noticed a ghost of a smile flit across the brunette's lips. The others lowered their eyes, hiding smirks. For some reason, the old man's words amused them. The first week in the commune passed in a blur of repetition. Wake up at 6:30, morning exercise, a simple breakfast, prayers and meditation, work in the pigsty or at the apiary, lunch, group therapy, more prayer and meditation, clearing trails or gathering berries and mushrooms, dinner, more therapy, and finally, sleep. Day after day, the same routine. Everyone in the Vale followed the rules without question. The strict schedule, Absalom's sermons, and the complete isolation from his old life gave Martin a fleeting sense of control, a fragile belief that maybe this time he wouldn't relapse, that he'd see the healing through. But deep down, he knew the remission was a lie. For the third night in a row, he woke in cold sweat, unable to escape the recurring nightmare that it had always been this way. For a while, Alina would vanish from his dreams. Then she would return. She reached for him with withered hands, her voice raw and broken as she begged for help. But Martin watched her from the dark caverns of his subconscious, detached and silent. Her face would swell and darken, turning an ugly shade of blue, and foul liquid streamed down her legs as her whisper decayed into a gurgle. The nightmare came every night, sometimes more than once, shattering his sleep into fragments of half-remembered dread, blurring the line between memory and waking. The blend had once been the only way to silence it all. Martin smoked to burn away every trace of Alina's memory. That night, she died again. Gasping for air, Martin shot upright in bed. His skin was slick with sweat, his hands trembling. From the next room came Osmond's rumbling snore. Martin had been assigned to live in the elder's house. That was the rule. Each newcomer stayed under Osmond's watch for the first few weeks, including at night. Only after that were they allowed to move in with the long-term residents. Martin sat on the edge of the bed, steadying his breath. Then he swung his legs over the side and planted his feet on the icy floorboards. The chill sobered him, and he knew he needed fresh air. Badly. Moving as quietly as possible, he dressed, crept past the elder's room, and stepped out onto the porch. Above him, stars shimmered in a coal-black sky, and a pale moon hung low. It was already August, and the nights had turned cool. Martin inhaled deeply, drawing in the sharp, earthy scent of forest and dew that he craved to smoke. If not the blend, then at least a regular cigarette. But like alcohol, they were strictly forbidden in the commune. For a moment, he considered the wild herbs that grew around the village, when something caught his eye. A flash of pale blue on the porch of the house across the clearing. Denimed in the 2 weeks since his arrival, Martin had gotten to know most of the residents. He hadn't gone out of his way to befriend anyone, but complete isolation wasn't realistic either. The girl in the denim jacket was named Yana, and aside from Absalom, she was the only person Martin spoke to with any regularity, if one could call their brief exchanges real conversations. A few words about the weather or complaints about the bland food. That was it. What really connected them was their shared history. Like Martin, Yana had once been hooked on the blend that he watched her descend the steps and disappear into the woods. After a brief hesitation, Martin followed. He tried to be quiet, but every branch and bramble seemed determined to betray him. Yana suddenly stopped and turned. Her pale face, framed by short black hair, was dominated by 2 wide, deer-like eyes. "What are you doing out here?" she asked, startled. "Getting some fresh air," Martin said, twisting his mouth into a crooked smile. What else could he say? She glanced past him toward the direction of Osmond's house, as if checking to see if they were being followed. "Is Osmond home? Did you wake him?" "He's out cold," Martin replied, taking a cautious step forward. But when he saw her tense, he stopped. "Okay, I won't beat around the bush. I need a hit." Yana's eyes widened even more. "Are you insane? If Absalom or Osmond find out someone's using in the commune, they'll lose their minds. You have no idea what they'll do." Martin glanced around nervously. Through the trees, the crooked village home stood hunched under the moonlight, gaunt and silent. Somewhere an owl hooted. The forest was thick with dampness and cold. Everything seemed still, but the ache in Martin's chest wouldn't ease. A dull anxiety pressed deeper, coiling inside him like something waiting to hatch. "Don't play the good girl, Yana," Martin said, licking his cracked lips. "You think I don't know why you snuck into the forest in the middle of the night? Share it, or I'll tell Absalom and Osmond." Yana's face twitched nervously. For a moment, Martin regretted threatening her, but he had no other choice. He wouldn't survive another night without the blend, or whatever this place could offer. He was a junkie, through and through. So to hell with honor and decency. Yana shot him a burning look, then muttered quietly, "Follow me." Yana pulled a flashlight from her jacket pocket and started down a narrow path, cutting the darkness with its pale beam. A short way in, she veered off into the woods. Martin followed, surprised at how confidently she navigated the nighttime forest. Then he noticed what guided her. Carved crosses, small, almost invisible, marked the trunks of pine trees. She was following a trail to Martin. It felt like they wandered for ages, though no more than an hour could have passed. Finally, the trees gave way to a wide depression with steep slopes, covered in withered grass, pushing through charred, black soil. A faint scent of burning hung in the air. Martin assumed there must have been a fire here once. The usual sounds of the forest, crickets, rustling leaves, owls, had disappeared, as if the pit had swallowed them whole. Yana carefully descended into the hollow. Martin followed her, stumbling over uneven ground cracked like old parchment. In the middle of the clearing, hunched in moonlight, stood a tall, gangly man in a baggy coat. Martin recognized him. Dan, one of the longer-term residents. He'd always avoided him. Dan used to smoke dust, and whatever that crap did to his brain had left him twitchy and short-tempered. On the ground near Dan sprawled two others, a lanky redhead who looked like a half-dead hobo, and a blonde girl. With a skeletal frame, her hair matted like an abused Barbie doll in the final stage of AIDS. Martin recognized them too. Arnold and Licka, longtime meth heads from the commune. They lay with arms stretched out, staring glassy-eyed at the stars, as if the vast cosmos were whispering the secrets of the universe just to them. Dan tensed the moment he saw Martin. "Who the hell is this?" he hissed. "Are you insane?" "He's new. Relax," Yana said, touching his shoulder. "He followed me. I didn't have a choice. And if he rats us out," Dan snarled, stepping toward Martin like a drunk thug spoiling for a fight. "We can't trust him." Martin held his ground, watching Dan's twisted face. "Calm down," he snapped. "I'm not snitching. I just need a hit." Dan glanced at Yana. She shrugged. "He's been here 2 weeks. I haven't seen him kissing Absalom's or Osmond's ass." Dan seemed satisfied with that. He squinted at Martin, then smirked. "Looking for a hit, huh? We don't have blend or any of that mainstream crap, but we've got something else." He nodded toward the ground beside Arnold and Licka. That's when Martin noticed the narrow fissure. A black slit in the earth, deep and endless, so dark it seemed to devour light. "Stick your hand in," Yana said. "Touch the bitterness. Then place it under your tongue." Martin stared at her, waiting for an explanation, but Yana only folded her arms and looked at him with quiet curiosity, like she was placing bets in her head. "Will he do it, or chicken out?" "Touch the bitterness?" Martin asked, hesitating. He didn't want her thinking he was a coward, though he knew courage was never his strong suit. "Less talk, more action," Dan growled, pushing him toward the fissure. "Go on. Try it, unless you're scared." Martin knelt at the crack in the earth. The smell of smoke wafted up from the depths. Beside him, Arnold and Licka stared at the stars. Grinning like lunatics, he rolled up his sleeve and shoved his arm into the darkness. "If this is some dumb prank," he warned, "I'll break your jaw." "Deeper," Dan barked. "And wait." Martin pushed until his shoulder met the edge of the fissure. The earth was rough and dry, until suddenly the space widened. His hand dropped into a void, and something touched him, cold, wet, soft. Martin yanked his hand back with a startled gasp and stumbled to his feet. He must have looked terrified because Dan and Yana both burst out laughing. But he didn't care. Something alive had touched him. Something real. His heart pounded. Under the moonlight, he examined his hand. First time always scares people, Yana said softly. Now try it. She pointed the flashlight at his palm. Martin saw a thick, tar-black slime clinging to his fingers. What the hell is this? He asked. Bitterness, Dan said, stepping closer, smiling for the first time. Don't be scared. Just put it under your tongue. Martin was ready to curse them both out and walk away. But then he caught Yana's eyes. She smiled not mockingly, but gently, almost warmly. Like she believed in him. Like she saw something worth saving. He hadn't been looked at like that in years. Martin swallowed dryly, raised his hand to his mouth, and pressed a finger beneath his tongue. The bitterness hit instantly. Sharp, acrid, almost metallic. He grimaced. His knees buckled. He collapsed. The charred ground embraced him as the sky above opened, vast and starlit. The bitterness surged through his veins, coiling through muscle and bone, devouring pain, fear, and despair, and replacing it all with joy, warmth, and peace. Somewhere at the edge of thought, a flash of Alina's face rose, then faded into the glowing dark. For the first time in years, Martin felt utterly calm. And truly happy. He woke to the sound of buzzing flies. Martin sat up in bed, blinking in the golden morning light. His room, inside Osmond's cottage, was warm and filled with sun. His body felt weightless, his mind clear. For once, his thoughts moved in quiet order. The crushing weight of guilt and self-loathing was gone. That he had no idea how he got back to bed. Maybe last night had just been a dream? The door opened. Osmond walked in, freshly shaven, a towel slung over his tattooed shoulders. You're late for breakfast, he said gruffly. That was how things worked with Osmond. He gave orders. Martin followed, avoiding the wrath of a former convict. Martin got dressed and stepped outside. By the dining shed, a row of wash basins hung from the wall. Dan was rinsing his face shirtless. Yana was brushing her teeth. Lika was setting out bowls. All three of them gave Martin knowing grins. But their smiles vanished when Absalom appeared, carrying a pot that steamed with the smell of oats, honey, and nuts. For the first time in ages, Martin felt hunger. His stomach growled, and his mouth watered. How did I get back here? He asked under his breath. You walked, Yana said, rinsing and spitting. You just don't remember. The bitterness knocks out a few hours. That's why we never all use it at the same time, Dan whispered, glancing at Absalom. Someone's always got to stay sober, help the others back. We only go once a week, Yana added. Any more and Absalom or Osmond would notice. Martin cupped icy water in his hands and splashed his face. The cold stung, but in a good way, as if even his nerve endings had been renewed. What is that stuff in the pit? He asked, brushing his teeth. No one knows, Dan replied, drying his face. When I first got here, some junkie named Stig told me about the hollow and the bitterness. He'd heard it from another addict. The secret's been passed down since Absalom founded the Veil. And where are all those other junkies now? Martin mumbled through toothpaste. Healed, Yana said with a grin. What? You really thought prayer and meditation were enough? Martin burst out laughing, spraying foam from his mouth, but immediately cast a wary glance toward the table. The old man was dishing out porridge and seemed to pay no attention to the conspirators by the washstand. With each time, the need for the bitterness lessens, Dan whispered. Then comes the moment when you need absolutely nothing, just the simplest things: air, food, and sleep. You're freed from everything else. You don't exactly look free, Martin smirked. Because I haven't finished the path yet. Dan snapped. But I'm close. Stig went to the Hollow for a whole year before it finally let him go. He left the community right before you arrived. And how long have you been going there? Martin looked at Yana. 5th month. Dan showed me the crevice in April. Stig and I used to dig it out from under the snow in winter. Dan added, pulling on his shirt and smoothing down his messy hair. Arnold and Lika have been on the bitterness since June. We were going to bring you in later. Wanted to make sure you wouldn't rat us out. Martin grimaced, but tried not to show he was hurt. It stung to realize that even among addicts, he wasn't truly accepted. Why don't you tell Absalom about the bitterness? Martin asked. Dan stared at him in disbelief, as if Martin were mentally deficient, but didn't have time to answer. A wild scream came from the cabin, and Arnold came crashing out, collapsing near the table. A moment later, an enraged Osmond stormed out after him, kicked him hard in the gut, and stood over him, seething. Arnold groaned, clutching his stomach, spitting out blood from a busted mouth. Looked like Osmond had landed a few punches inside. 2. Martin glanced around, confused. Dan and Yana stood frozen in shock. Lika covered her face in fear. Only Absalom watched with cold detachment. Putting aside his bowl of porridge, he stepped up to Osmond, who loomed over the crumpled Arnold. Like a punisher. "What happened, my son?" the old man asked, lifting his heavy brows. "This little bastard was hiding cigarettes," Osmond shouted, fists clenched, spittle flying from his twisted lips. "I found a pack under his pillow." Dan shook his head and whispered to Martin and Yana, barely audible, "What an idiot. I told Arnold 100 times to ditch the smokes." Absalom knelt beside Arnold, looked into his battered face, and asked gently, "Is it true, Arnold? You smoke behind my back." Arnold mumbled something in response, but Absalom didn't seem interested in the confession. He rose and said curtly to Osmond, 10 lashes with the belt." Then he turned to Martin and the others. "Children, remember this. Every wrongdoing demands punishment. We'll discuss Arnold's behavior at the evening meeting." Absalom returned to the table. Osmond grinned with satisfaction and unbuckled his belt. With a kick, he rolled Arnold onto his stomach, pulled up his shirt to expose his pale, bony back, then straightened and, with all his might, lashed him. Arnold screamed as the leather belt cracked across his back. He kept screaming while Osmond whipped him again and again, his face twisted in rage. Martin felt sick. A lump rose in his throat, and a familiar seed of anxiety bloomed faintly in his chest. If he let it grow, the dysphoria would burst into a black flower. He turned away, unable to watch, and met Dan's eyes. The guy stood paralyzed, his face contorted in fear. The 10th blow split Arnold's back. The punishment was over. Osmond stuffed his belt back into his jeans, gave the others a crooked look, his eyes asking, "Who's next?" "Let us begin the meal," Absalom said calmly, gesturing to the table. Dan and Yana nodded submissively and followed Osmond, joining the stoic Absalom and a terrified Lika. Martin hesitated, then helped Arnold off the ground. Groaning in pain, the scrawny boy pulled down his shirt and limped toward the table. Martin followed awkwardly. The residents of the commune joined hands, heads bowed over bowls of porridge. Absalom began to mumble a prayer, and the others dutifully echoed the words. Words none of them, except Osmond, truly cared about. As Martin repeated the familiar phrases, he realized why his new friends obeyed Absalom's strict rules so unquestioningly. Dan, Yana, Arnold, and Lika were buying time, clinging to access to the bitterness, the strange substance that truly brought them healing. After breakfast and meditation, Absalom assigned chores. Martin once again got stuck mucking out the pigsty with Yana. The dirty work didn't seem to bother her. She shoveled quickly and efficiently, shooing the pigs away as they shoved each other. "Now I understand why you don't tell Absalom about the bitterness," Martin said, scooping manure. "The old man thinks prayer and hard work cure addicts." Yana dumped the filth into a wheelbarrow and smirked. "He won't tolerate any other method. Cigarettes and booze drive him into a rage. You saw what happened to poor Arnold. If Absalom found out we got clean with the help of another substance, he'd destroy the crevice and the bitterness along with it. Goodbye, healing." "And Osmond, does he know?" "Osmond is Absalom's right hand. We know little about him, but ex-residents say he used to be a junkie, heroin, a real psycho." They say Absalom saved him from an overdose. Since then, Osmond's loyal like a dog. Yana glanced outside and, seeing no one nearby, lowered her voice. Of course he doesn't know. If he did, I don't even want to imagine what he'd do to us. He talks to me like I'm his prison lackey, Martin said, then added after a pause. What do you think's in the crevice? Yana's face darkened. She set the shovel aside and said quietly, something alive. I don't know what, but it touches me differently every time. Gently, cautiously, like it's tasting me. We shone flashlights in there, but couldn't see a thing. Martin recalled the black slime on his fingers. And instead of the disgust he might have felt in any other situation, a wave of emotion washed over him. Peace, calm, joy, long-forgotten feelings that surged through him the night something from the depths touched his hand. I studied biology before I got hooked, Yana continued. Wasn't exactly a model student, but I remember some organisms can produce psychoactive substances. Mushrooms, for example, or some types of toads. And where did the crater come from? It looks like something burned the ground. We don't know. Yana shrugged. Arnold thinks it's a meteorite impact. That's why the Earth is scorched and cracked, like something crashed into it. Or maybe it's some geopathic zone where everything withers. I once saw a TV show about those while stoned. They said all kinds of crazy stuff. Martin snorted. So basically, there's a hallucinogenic toad in a meteor crater healing us from addiction. Yana burst out laughing, and Martin grinned, pleased he could still make a pretty girl laugh. He stepped closer and only now noticed the pale freckles on her nose. They contrasted oddly with her jet black hair, adding warmth to her otherwise distant, drug-worn appearance. Martin leaned in and kissed her soft, velvety lips he'd longed to touch. Yana kissed him back, but after a moment that felt eternal, she pulled away with a smile and said, "No one's ever hit on me in a pigsty before." Martin chuckled, but stopped short as Yana's face changed. She'd seen something behind him. Grabbing her shovel, she resumed cleaning the pin with exaggerated seriousness. Martin turned. Osmond stood outside, watching them. He caught Martin's eye, sneered, and wagged a finger at him. 2 days later, after fake prayers and group sessions where the residents of Udall pretended to be dutiful wards of Absalom, Martin suddenly realized with dread the magical effect of the bitterness was wearing off. He woke up with a pounding head and a foul mood. The familiar anxiety stirred in his chest, faint but growing. Martin knew the signs. Soon, the dysphoria would bloom again, black and choking. Another visit from Alina awaited him. Another night of torment he wasn't sure he could survive. But why suffer when salvation was within reach? Martin remembered what Yana had said. The addicts went to the bitterness once a week and in complete secrecy. But that meant he had to endure 5 more nights, 5 more nightmares with Alina, her accusing eyes, and that shredded voice gasping in death throes. Martin decided to act that very night. He waited until Osmond fell asleep. His snoring echoed from the neighboring room, then got dressed and silently slipped out of the house. He crossed the yard and disappeared into the thick underbrush, steeped in darkness and cool air. Using his flashlight to scan the path, he searched for the markings on the trees, faint symbols guiding him to the hidden hollow deep in the woods. The foliage whispered anxiously around him, as if warning of some imminent doom. Overhead, the moon shone indifferently in the black sky, uncaring of Martin's fate. After an hour of wandering through the pine forest, he finally reached the depression. Bathed in silver moonlight, it looked like a lifeless crater. Martin descended the slope toward the center of the hollow, where a dark crevice split the earth, the refuge of the miraculous bitterness. He dropped to his knees and, after a brief hesitation, slipped his hand into the crack, where the familiar scent of scorched earth met his nostrils. Martin waited patiently, and after a moment, something wet and sticky touched his palm. "So this is where you've been sneaking off to," rasped a voice behind him. Startled, Martin jerked his hand out and spun around. Osmond stood before him, teeth bared, fists clenched, eyes drilling into him. "What are you hiding in there?" Osmond growled. "Drugs." "Osmond, listen," Martin began, trying to move his smeared hand behind his back. "Show me your hand." The convict barked, cutting him off. Martin took a step back, panicking. What should he do? If Osmond saw the slime on his palm, he'd realize where it came from. He must have seen Martin reaching into the crevice. He'd tell Absalom, and the elder would destroy the hollow along with the bitterness, killing Martin's only hope of healing. Seizing the moment, Osmond lunged forward to grab his arm. Martin dodged and, with all his strength, smashed the flashlight against the bald crown of Osmond's head. Something cracked. Osmond grunted in surprise, staggered, and fell. His head slumped into the crevice. Martin, breathing heavily, shone the flashlight on the motionless man. Osmond lay sprawled on the ground, unconscious, maybe dead. Martin trembled, his throat tight with panic. Could a scrawny ex-junkie like him really kill a man like Osmond with a flashlight blow? Blood pulsed from Osmond's temple, dark, viscous, lacquer-like, and streamed into the crevice. Martin lost track of time. It could have been minutes or an eternity. Then, something long and sinuous slid cautiously out of the crevice, slick and black with glistening slime. The creature, resembling a giant leech, latched onto the wound on Osmond's head. It lingered a moment, as if tasting him, then began to feed greedily, bloating and contracting in rhythmic spasms. Martin stifled a scream. Osmond groaned, stirred, but couldn't rise. His dazed eyes met Martin's, pleading, helpless, but Martin was frozen in place, watching in horror as the creature gulped down blood in thick, obscene slurps. Sated, it detached with a wet smack, then darted toward Osmond's open mouth. It slid inside, writhing, vanishing down his throat, leaving behind a trail of black slime on his lips. Martin screamed and bolted, clambering out of the hollow. He fled through the woods, stumbling over roots and rocks. But soon the bushes parted, the ground vanished beneath his feet, and he tumbled headfirst into a ravine that he lay there, gasping, heart pounding, sucking in cold air. The memory of what he'd seen swirled in his mind. A creature lived in the pit, the same one that produced the healing bitterness. But something far worse had happened. The creature had drained Osmond's blood and invaded his body. Probably killed him, and Martin hadn't helped. Just like with Alina, Osmond had died in front of him. Martin crawled under a massive root jutting from the earth and curled up, hugging himself. Slippery clumps of bitterness still clung to his fingers, and without thinking, he smeared them under his tongue. Moments later, peace and bliss engulfed him. Martin awoke. Morning sunlight stabbed his eyes, and birds shrieked from every direction. The ravine was wrapped in a damp mist, and his clothes were soaked through with dew. He climbed out, shivering, and shuffled along a pine trail. His soul felt light, calm. Martin convinced himself that the night's events had only been a nightmare. Absalom's fury for breaking curfew seemed trivial now, laughable even. But what if it wasn't a dream? What if the thing from the pit and Osmond's death were real? A chill ran down his spine. He shook off the thought. The trail led him to the edge of the woods, where the community's cottages stood in orderly rows. It was likely time for group meditation, meaning Absalom and the others would be in the gazebo. Martin headed that way. There was no point hiding. Punishment was inevitable. Better to show up now. Tail between his legs to his surprise. Only Yana was there, sweeping the floor. She looked up and gasped. "Where have you been? We've been searching for you and Osmond." Martin sat down on a bench, out of breath. "Absalom raised the alarm this morning when he found your cabin empty," Yana went on. "He and Dan went into the woods to look for you." "Martin, what happened? Where's Osmond?" He didn't know what to say. Somewhere deep inside, fear and anxiety stirred, but the bitterness dulled them. All his emotions felt distant, drained of color and meaning, echoes of something once intense. "No idea," Martin muttered. "I'm going to the cabin." Yana frowned, watching him go, but Martin didn't care. The bitterness cradled him, numbed him, silenced his conscience. Osmond had brought it on himself, chasing after him like that. He got what he deserved. His body was probably cooling by the crevice now, visited by whatever had crawled out of it. Martin was only human, entitled to fear, to cowardice. Who wouldn't be terrified of a monster sucking blood from a man's skull? As he approached the house, Martin let out a bitter chuckle. He'd used those same words to justify his inaction when Alina died. Inside, he walked toward his room. The dry floorboards creaked familiarly underfoot, but something else joined the sound. A wet, sucking squelch. Martin looked down. His sneakers splashed through a shiny, red puddle that was blood. The sharp, metallic scent punched his nose. The puddle flowed from Osmond's room. The door stood ajar like a beckoning mouth. Martin froze. Sweat broke down his back. His hands trembled. His mouth went dry. Every fiber of him screamed to run, to flee, again, but he forced himself to stay. What if Osmond had made it back? What if he was wounded and needed help? Maybe this was Martin's second chance, to make up for leaving him to die in the forest. Legs shaking, Martin approached the room and looked inside. His breath caught. His gut twisted into a block of ice. Lying in a vast pool of blood was Arnold. Martin recognized the mop of red hair, now smeared with crimson. The boy's shirt was torn open, his bony chest slashed with wide, ragged wounds. One of them, right over his heart, was latched onto by the same black creature from the crevice. It was protruding from Osmond's mouth. The elder crouched over Arnold on all fours, his eyes rolled back to whites, hands trembling, body convulsing. The creature slithered from his throat like a grotesque umbilical cord, pulsing and flexing as it fed on Arnold's heart. Martin bolted from the house. He ran blindly, knocking over buckets and wash basins, tearing across the yard. Anywhere, as long as it was far from what he had just seen. He stopped only at the edge of the commune. His lungs burned, his arms shook. He turned back toward Osmond's house. The place was deserted. Not a soul in sight. Only the wind rustled through the birch trees. Yana and Liko were still inside. They were in danger. God knows what that creature, now inside Osmond, was capable of. He should go back. Warn them. Help them. But he couldn't move. His veins pulsed with cowardice. And not even the bitterness could burn it away. There he is, our runaway. A thunderous bass voice roared from behind. Martin jumped in fright on the spot and turned toward the sound. From the forest, Absalom and Dan approached the commune with brisk steps. The junkie squinted unpleasantly at Martin, as if signaling, "Don't blab." Absalom was about to say something else, but seeing Martin's frightened look, his expression changed. He frowned and asked sternly, "What happened?" "Arnold," Martin managed to whisper, nodding toward Osmond's cabin. "He's dead." Absalom cursed under his breath, and those were the first swear words to come out of his mouth since Martin had arrived at the commune. The old man quickly strode toward Osmond's house, growling on the way, "Follow me, Martin." And Dan hurried after Absalom, slowing down slightly and falling back a bit so the old man wouldn't hear them. Martin, stunned and confused, asked Dan the first thing that came to mind. "Where were you?" "They were looking for you, idiot." "And Osmond, too," the junkie hissed. I barely convinced the old man to come back before he wandered into the hollow. Absalom stormed up the porch steps and entered the house. The door was wide open. Martin wanted to warn of danger, but was suddenly overwhelmed by a strange indifference. Whatever had happened to Absalom or Dan, it was no longer his fault. It must have been the effect of the bitterness. The black substance absorbed all negative emotions like oil spilled on the surface of a restless sea. Sometimes fear and guilt broke through, only to vanish again into the viscous pool of calm and indifference. In this murky swamp, the images of Alina and Yana drowned. One of them Martin could no longer save, and the fate of the other troubled him less and less. "Lord, what happened here?" came Absalom's broken voice from the room. No one was screaming in horror or running away, which meant the danger had passed, or at least no longer posed the previous threat. Martin hesitated briefly, then peeked into the room after Absalom stood beside Arnold's sprawled corpse. His death was beyond doubt. The junkie lay motionless in a huge pool of blood, eyes frozen wide open. His gaunt torso was covered in torn wounds, the largest one gaping wide over the heart area. On Arnold's face was a grimace of horror and surprise, as if he hadn't expected Osmond's attack, the man with whom he had lived in the commune for several months. What happened here? Absalom asked hoarsely, shifting his gaze from the corpse to Martin. And where's Osmond? Not in the other room, Dan answered, appearing again in the doorway. He must have searched the cabin. Martin swallowed thick saliva, not knowing what to say. Telling the truth meant admitting his own cowardice. He had abandoned Osmond and Arnold in trouble, though he could have saved them. Licka. Yana's clear voice came from outside, and Martin felt a weight lift from his heart. She was alive. Despite the anesthetizing effect of the bitterness, deep down he still worried about the girl. Licka, where are you? Yana called again. Martin stepped out with Absalom and Dan. Yana stood near the porch, preparing to climb to the house entrance. I can't find Licka anywhere. Her face darkened when she saw the men's frightened expressions. Did something happen? Hopefully not, Absalom said, running down the steps. Have you looked everywhere? Not in our house. And I thought she stayed at Osmond and Martin's cabin. She's not there, Dan muttered, his voice trembling with anxiety, his pale face showing confusion and fear. Absalom stopped in the middle of the yard and, scanning his wards with a worried look, commanded strictly, listen carefully. No one leaves, stay close. Priority number 1, find Licka. He looked at Yana and asked, check the pigsty? The girl shook her head. Absalom then rushed to the building at the edge of the settlement. Everyone else followed him. Yana walked between Martin and Dan, barely keeping up. She asked in a quiet, worried voice, what's going on? Why all this fuss? Arnold's dead, Dan said as if spitting the words out. Someone put so many holes in him that all his blood drained out. I've never seen anything so brutal. The news shocked Yana. She gasped fearfully, her large eyes seeming to double in size. She was about to ask more, but Absalom's shout interrupted her. Here she is. The old man shouted from the pigsty where he had disappeared moments before, and Martin and friends hurried after him, but on the floor, leaning back against the pig pen and stretching her legs out, sat Licka, as emaciated and gaunt as Martin had known her in the 2 weeks at Udall. Her eyes were closed as if asleep. Nearby lay a tipped-over bucket of rotten vegetables that the commune members fed the pigs. Absalom grabbed the girl's shoulder and shook her. Licka, he called. Then, receiving no response, lightly tapped her cheek with his palm. Looks like she's unconscious. Martin, Yana, and Dan crowded close, watching as Absalom tried to revive the junkie. He slapped her cheeks and shook her hands. Licka groaned, coming to. Opening her eyes, she looked at them bewildered. Where am I? She mumbled. You're in the pigsty. Absalom helped her up. What happened? Licka swayed. Her stick-thin legs barely supported her frail body. Martin reached out his hand, and the junkie clung to it with cold fingers, trying not to fall. I was feeding the pigs, she began with a trembling voice. Suddenly I turned around. Osmond was standing behind me. I remember asking him where he'd been all morning, since we'd searched for you. Licka looked at Martin with a cloudy gaze, as if expecting some comment from him, but Absalom hurried her. What happened next? He attacked me. Licka sobbed. Knocked me to the ground, grabbed my neck with his hands, and then she fell silent, looking confused at the group. I don't remember anything after that, Licka whispered. I opened my eyes, and you're already standing here. Absalom fixed a stern gaze on Martin, pursing his lips. Do you have anything to add? He asked darkly. Where the hell were you and Osmond this morning? There was no point in denying it. The creature inside Osmond posed a deadly threat to all Udall residents, and the sooner Martin told everything, the better. He sighed heavily and began his story, spilling everything as it was, hiding nothing and glossing over no detail. Despite the fantastic elements, Martin tried to make his story sound believable, so while recounting, forcing himself, he looked each listener in the eyes one by one. Absalom, Yana, Dan, and Lika listened attentively, but soon their faces shifted from interest to disbelief, then disgust when Martin told how he left Osmond to die by the hollow's crevice. Martin knew the effect his words would have. They would see him as a coward and scoundrel who abandoned a man in trouble, but he didn't care. Every night, he went through hell of self-loathing when Alina appeared to him in nightmares, finishing with the part about the creature that came out of Osmond's mouth and sucked Arnold's blood. Martin lowered his eyes, waiting for questions or any reaction. Yana and Lika processed the horror of Arnold's death with stunned looks, while Absalom and Dan looked at Martin with a mix of distrust and disgust. His story was so incredible it took time to absorb. Finally, Absalom broke the silence. Is he telling the truth about the bitterness? He asked Dan, "You've been sneaking off to the hollow and using some crap all this time?" Absalom's cheeks turned pale, his jaw muscles twitched, and a vein throbbed on his forehead. He was furious but trying to hold himself back. Dan seemed to shrink to half his size and, shamefully averting his eyes, nodded. Absalom looked back at Martin. "I don't know what crap you tried, but it sure screwed your brain. You don't believe me?" Martin challenged. "Maybe. You suspect me of killing Arnold? That's unlikely. Considering how much blood he lost, you couldn't have killed him without getting covered in it," Absalom said calmly and rationally. "Whether to believe you or not is a job for the police, not me. We need help." Lika squealed, raising her hands to her face. "Osmond will kill us." The junkie trembled with a slight shiver, and Yana hugged her. "Not Osmond, but that creature that possessed him," Dan grimly corrected, then glanced at Martin and added quietly, "If that's true, of course." His look was full of contempt mixed with disappointment. Martin had revealed the secret of the bitterness and indirectly caused Arnold's death. Now he would forever be a traitor and bastard in Dan's eyes. While Martin gathered words to defend himself, Yana interrupted. "But how do we call for help?" She asked Absalom. "Do you have a phone?" The old man shook his head. "No contact with the outside world is one of the Udall rules and the key to your full recovery." "Complete healing?" he exclaimed indignantly. "Have you still not realized that we were recovering thanks to the bitter stuff, and not because of you, you old geezer? And now everything's gone to hell." Absalom's fists clenched, and his face flushed crimson. A fight could break out any second. Martin took a cautious step back, not wanting to get caught in the middle of the brawl. But the community leader held himself back, exhaling through tightly pressed lips. Absalom gave Dan a look full of disappointment and said calmly, "Here's what we'll do. We'll go together to the riverbank. There's a boat waiting there. We'll get in, cross to one of the settlements on the opposite shore, and call for help from there." "What about Arnold?" Lika sniffled. "Are we really going to leave him here? There's nothing more to be done for him. Besides, the body can't be touched until the police arrive," Absalom explained. "Let's move quietly and without haste. Keep your eyes open. If you see Osmond, alert immediately." "Understood." The plan seemed simple and sensible, and the Udall inhabitants nodded in agreement. "But first, you'll take me to the bitter stuff," Absalom suddenly added, his voice laced with icy tones so chilling that none of his charges dared to argue. In daylight, the path to the basin looked different than at night. Slanting sunbeams filtered through the foliage, a barely visible trail wound beneath their feet, and birds chirped in the treetops. Despite the idyllic surroundings, Martin was uneasy. Somewhere nearby roamed the maddened Osmond, inside whom dwelt an unknown creature, hungry for blood. Just the thought of it made nausea rise in his throat. The effect of the bitter stuff was wearing off. Martin no longer felt the strange lightness that had shielded him from unpleasant emotions for the past few hours. With every passing minute, anxiety and fear grew, threatening to overwhelm him completely. To distract himself from these dark thoughts, he focused on the path ahead. Dan walked in front, confidently weaving between tree trunks marked with crosses. Behind him, frequently glancing around, came Yana and Lika. Absalom brought up the rear. In his hand, he held a canister of gasoline. To refuel the engine, the old man had explained. Martin heard his ragged breathing behind him, but didn't dare to look back. Soon the forest ended, and a basin opened before them. The birdsong ceased, and the light breeze died down. It seemed the hollow absorbed not only sounds but the slightest movement of air. In the daylight, Martin noticed a detail he hadn't seen during their nighttime excursions. The tops of the pines supporting the basin were blackened, their trunks charred as if scorched by some catastrophic fire from the sky. "Lead to the fissure," Absalom ordered. Addressing Dan, Dan obediently guided the group to the center of the basin, where a narrow crevice darkened. The smell of burnt wood was stronger there. Martin shuddered when he saw his flashlight lying on the ground, the same one he had used to strike Osmond's head during the night. Absalom gave Martin a disapproving glance, then picked up the flashlight and shone it into the crevice. "You can't see anything," Dan said. "We've tried several times to see inside, but all we saw was darkness." Absalom straightened and, squinting against the bright sun, looked at his followers. "When I first came to these woods, the farmstead was still inhabited," he began. "The locals talked about this place. They called it the Devil's Cauldron, and had no idea how it came to be. They said the hollow was always lifeless, but nobody knew why. The locals were afraid of it and avoided it. I never came here because I thought their stories were just old wives' tales." "Did they say anything about black slime in the crevice?" Yana asked. "No. I don't think they even knew about it. And certainly, they never tasted the slime." Absalom looked at Dan with irritation. Only drug addicts could have thought of something like that. The old man unscrewed the canister's cap and poured gasoline into the bottomless crevice. "What are you doing?" Lika croaked. The drug addict's face darkened and twisted into a horrible grimace. Martin was surprised at the strange transformations of Lika's features, but truly feared when he caught a faint smell of burning coming from the girl's mouth. "Detoxifying," Absalom replied. He pulled from behind his belt a thin orange cylinder, a flare he always carried in the forest in case of wild animal encounters. Absalom pulled the cord, and a bright red flame burst forth. He threw the flare into the gasoline-soaked crevice, and the earth's depths flared with fire. A wave of heat scorched their faces. For a moment, Martin thought he heard a thin, painful, terrified squeal from the hollow, as if something alive was burning alive in the merciless flames. Lika screamed wildly and lunged at Absalom. Growling fiercely and foaming at the mouth, she threw him to the ground. The old man seemed stunned by the sudden attack. Eyes wide, mouth agape in shock, he lay flat beneath the girl who jumped on him, as if unable to believe so much strength came from the scrawny body of a drug addict. Arching her back like a beast, Lika opened her mouth wide, saliva dripping down, and pressed close to the old man's face. A flash of black, a glossy, elastic intestine covered in slime slipped from Lika's mouth and lightning-fast plunged into Absalom's neck. A wet smack, a spray of red, and the creature convulsed, greedily sucking blood from the wound. Absalom wheezed hoarsely, convulsed, and clawed at the black earth, unable to throw Lika off. It seemed strange that such a strong man could not overpower a skinny girl. "Run!" came a shout from above, and Martin turned around. Yana was waving her hands desperately, standing on the edge of the basin. Beside her stood Dan, stunned, ready to bolt at any moment. Martin didn't even notice when they managed to escape from the crevice. He turned back to Absalom at the very moment the creature from Lika's mouth finished its meal. Peeling off wetly from the wound on the neck, it twisted toward Martin. It had no eyes, only a round black mouth, filled with many transparent teeth resembling those of a fish. But Martin could swear the creature somehow looked straight at him, like a predator sensing its next victim. Lika was on all fours above the sprawled Absalom, her glazed eyes and mask of indifference telling one thing. She had no awareness of her actions, and was completely under the will of the monstrous entity. "Run, you idiot!" Dan shouted from the hill, and Martin ran. A moment later, he was climbing the slope, escaping the basin. Yana and Dan, shifting impatiently, urged him on with desperate cries. "Faster! She's right behind!" Martin glanced over his shoulder. Behind, bearing a snarling face twisted with rage, Licca was chasing him. Someone grabbed Martin's arm and sharply pulled him out of the basin, helping him climb faster to the top. "Run!" Dan breathed into his ear. They took off, dashing into the forest, leaving behind the dead Absalom and Licca, possessed by the insatiable creature. Yana was the first to give out. She stopped and bent over, hands on her knees. Gasping loudly for air, she tried to calm her breathing. Martin and Dan, noticing this, stopped running and approached her. "I can't go on," she exhaled. "My heart feels like it's stopping." Martin looked through the tree trunks, scanning for Licca, but all he saw was bark, leaves, and bushes. "Looks like we lost her," he whispered. "We ran so fast through the forest, she probably couldn't catch up." "Are you sure?" Dan grimaced. "Did you see how she took down Absalom? And he didn't even resist." Arnold's body had multiple wounds, Martin recalled. Like he also completely gave up to Osmond. Yana straightened and, brushing hair from her forehead, quietly said, "Maybe this creature injects something into the blood that suppresses the victim's will." "Do you even understand what that was?" Dan looked at Yana intently, expecting a detailed answer. "How would I know?" the girl replied, surprised. "But you studied biology." Dan protested. Yana paused for a moment, as if recalling all the reptiles, amphibians, worms, and other creepy crawlies she had read about during her brief time at university. "Most of all, it reminds me of a giant worm," she answered uncertainly. "A worm?" Martin was surprised. "I've never heard of it. It's an amphibian, but it looks like a giant earthworm. Lives in soil," Yana explained. "But I've never heard of such worms attacking people or secreting narcotic substances." Dan bit his lip and looked around warily, searching for danger among the trees. "Worm or not, that creature has taken over Osmond and Licca," he said. "Now they're somewhere nearby and want to kill us." "Probably Osmond infected Licca when he attacked her in the pigsty," Yana suggested. "But why does the creature infect some people and suck blood from others?" Martin wondered. In response, there was a dry crackle of twigs and the rustle of grass nearby. Martin, Dan, and Yana froze, listening intently to the source of the sound. Countless pines towered around them, and it seemed danger could be lurking behind any one of them. The sun was sinking toward the treetops. Martin marveled at how quickly the day had ended. Just a little more, and twilight would fall over the forest. The rustling repeated. It came from the right. Turning toward the sound, Martin spotted a man crawling on all fours among the pines. "Help me," he rasped, then collapsed onto the ground. It was Osmond. Martin, Yana, and Dan stood frozen, hesitant to approach the overseer. He lay on dry deadwood, arms spread, breathing heavily, unable to move. "It left me," Osmond whispered. "Help me." Dan cautiously, as if expecting an attack at any moment, stepped closer to the overseer. Martin and Yana exchanged wary looks and followed. Stopping 3 steps away, they inspected him. His jeans and shirt darkened with blood. His face was contorted, and his mouth bubbled with black foam mixed with slime. His eyes, once harsh and piercing, now wandered confusedly over Martin's, Yana's, and Dan's faces, begging for help. But none dared approach closer. Finally, Osmond's gaze fixed on Martin, sharpened and darkened with rage. "You left me in the hollow, bastard," the overseer rasped, his lips stained with black slime. "Abandoned me to be torn apart by that thing." Osmond coughed, spraying clumps of phlegm, and the others stepped back in disgust. "Sorry." Martin stammered, averting his eyes. "What did you do to Licca?" Yana burst out. "You infected her?" A spasm twisted Osmond's pain-stricken face, and he groaned. His waxy forehead glistened with sweat, the tip of his nose turned blue, and his eyes clouded. The overseer was at death's door. It controlled me. He whispered, his voice growing weaker with each word. Left me and moved into Licca. It was searching. Searching for what? Dan stepped closer to catch every word. What does it want? Osmond did not answer. His gaze glazed over, swollen eyelids closed, and his slime-blackened mouth rasped one last breath. Night fell quickly and relentlessly. It felt like moments ago they were standing beside Osmond's corpse, and suddenly the last flames of sunset faded, and twilight, lit by the rusty moonlight, soaked the emptiness between the trees. They decided to leave Osmond where he died and did not bury him. Despite his dying confession that the creature from the crevice had transferred into Licca, the fear of catching the unknown infection was so great that they didn't dare even touch the overseer's body to check his pulse. Martin, Yana, and Dan found themselves deep in the thicket with no idea how to get back to the shore with the boat. Wandering in the darkness through the brush, where Licca, possessed by the creature, could be hiding behind any tree, seemed madness. After a brief debate, they decided to spend the night in a clearing and at first light set off to find the river. I was thinking about Osmond's words while you were starting the fire, Yana said quietly. They settled near the campfire. Dan curled up on the ground, dozing as he awaited his watch. Yana sat next to Martin, leaning against him, the flickering firelight dancing on her pale face. An owl hooted away, and cicadas cracked, filling the night with a sickly anticipation of something terrible and inevitable. What words? Martin asked. He had volunteered to keep watch first and now peered anxiously into the deepening darkness behind the fire, where vague shadows stirred, one of which might be Licca. About what the creature is looking for, Yana replied. She was to take watch after Martin, but couldn't sleep and kept him company by the fire. Maybe it's just hungry. Then why didn't it attack us earlier when we went to the crevice? Martin shrugged, unsure how to answer. He felt the warmth radiating from Yana. Hesitating briefly, he put his arm around her shoulders. She didn't pull away, and Martin's heart pounded in his chest like a bird trapped in a cage. For the first time in a long while since Alina's death, someone truly mattered to him. I think it's tasting people, Yana whispered after a pause, laying her head on Martin's chest. You said how Osmond's blood after fighting you spilled into the crevice. What if it liked it? It hooked the creature. Like a drug. Martin smirked. So the creature's looking for a new fix? Now I get why you were kicked out of bio school. Yana pushed him playfully in the side with a smile. Go to sleep, smarty, she snorted. My turn to keep watch. I still won't sleep, Martin said gloomily. I can't. Yana looked at him closely. The firelight flickered in her night-black eyes. Why did you decide to quit? She suddenly asked. You didn't say at the meeting. In Martin's mind flashed the image of Alina, the swollen face, bloodshot eyes, the rope tight around her neck. The secret he had kept so long no longer mattered. This night could be his last. I had a girlfriend, Martin began quietly. Her name was Alina. Like me, she was on the mix. But if I became paranoid, Alina was haunted by thoughts of suicide. Many times she talked about death as the only way to end our addiction. But you ignored her words? Martin nodded. His throat tightened, chest ached and burned, and in his mind the deathly image of Alina faded. One day I went to her place, he said with difficulty. We got high. I curled in a corner, feeling high, or thinking I was. Alina put a stool under the chandelier, made a noose on the rope. He faltered. His lips trembled, tears filled his eyes. A strong shiver shook him. Yana took his hand, and he immediately went limp as if freed from icy grips that had kept him from breathing. Fully all these years, she hanged herself in front of my eyes, and I just lay in the corner watching, Martin blurted out. And didn't stop her. He looked at Yana fearfully, expecting judgment or disgust. She was the first person he'd told the truth to. His family and the police were told he'd been unconscious when Alina hanged herself. But to his relief, Yana's face, lit by flickering firelight, showed understanding and sympathy. She hugged Martin and laid his head on her lap. "You need to sleep," she said, stroking his hair. "Dawn is coming soon." "I'm a coward," Martin muttered, sinking into a viscous drowse filled with the taste of salty tears on his lips and the image of dead Alina forever poisoning his existence. Something cold and wet fell on his face. Martin opened his eyelids. Blinking sleepily, he focused. The night gloom changed to the gray mist of early morning. The campfire was out. Thin smoke rose from the embers. A weightless fog wrapped the clearing where they had rested. The moisture-filled air settled on the foliage and dripped in large dewdrops, which woke Martin. His body was stiff. Muscles and bones ached after sleeping on the cold ground. His teeth chattered. He looked around. Nearby, curled in a fetal position, lay Yana. She had handed over the night watch to Dan and was now lost in restless sleep. Dark circles under her eyes, a crease between her brows, pale lips pressed thin. The place where Dan had slept was empty, and a pang of anxiety stabbed Martin's chest. Where had he gone? The brush rustled, and a dark, staggering figure appeared from the bushes. Martin jumped up, expecting to see Lika, but the person came closer, and in the gray mist Martin recognized Dan with relief. "Where have you been?" Martin exhaled, hoping Dan wouldn't notice the trembling in his voice or his shaking hands. "Went to piss," Dan spat, casting a crooked grin at Martin. Then at Yana. "Get moving, lovebirds. It's time to go." Yana, awakened by the voices, rose from the ground and stared drowsily at the two men. Martin smiled at her. Catching his gaze, she beamed in return. "I found a path to the river," Dan said, gesturing toward the forest. "I remembered this place. Absalom and I used to come here to pick berries. Over there, beyond the ravine with the fallen pine, there's a trail that leads to the shore." "You shouldn't have gone without us," Martin began, but Dan cut him off. "Shut up and get ready fast." They reached the river as the sun rose above the trees. The thicket opened, revealing a narrow, sandy strip, beyond which dark, heavy river waters flowed. Absalom's motorboat, pulled ashore, gleamed dull aluminum sides. "Damn, no gas." Dan cursed, checking the fuel tank. The news didn't surprise Martin. No wonder Absalom took a canister of fuel when they hurriedly left Udall. Only he had poured all the gasoline into the crevice. But Martin remembered something. When Absalom brought me by boat, he hid fuel canisters in a stash. "Do you remember where?" Dan asked, and when Martin nodded, he barked, "Drag them here, and meanwhile we'll launch the boat." Martin climbed the hill, recalling the path Absalom had led him along several weeks ago. The trail, overgrown with grass, wound beneath his feet and soon brought him to a small grove. His gaze caught sight of a wooden platform, covered with fallen branches and grass. The cover of the cache seemed slightly shifted to the side, but there was no time to examine it closely. Grasping the edge of the board, he pulled the platform toward himself and immediately jumped back. In the pit, on top of gasoline cans, lay Lika, clasping her hands on her chest and pulling her legs close to her stomach. She was quietly moaning. Daylight, falling on the addict's face, forced her to lift her head. Squinting through blurred eyes, Lika turned toward Martin, and he noticed the black slime smeared across her lips and chin. Her hair was tangled and blackened with dirt. Her face looked painfully gaunt and darkened. Lika rasped something, black slime bubbling in her mouth, and Martin grimaced with horror and disgust. "Dan," she whispered with difficulty. As if each word caused her pain, Lika didn't need to say more. Martin understood immediately. The creature had transferred from Lika's body to Denver. Most likely, it had happened during his night watch, but what difference did it make now? Den was alone with Yana, who had no idea what danger was threatening her. Martin cast one last glance at Lika. Like Osmond before her, the addict was dying. Only minutes remained, and Martin could do nothing to help her. He turned and rushed back toward the river. Sliding down the hill, Martin did not immediately understand what was happening at the shore. Den stood on all fours in the boat with his back to him. His body convulsed as if he were vomiting. Yana was nowhere to be seen. A cold wave washed over Martin. His legs weakened. He knew what was coming next. Taking a step or two toward the boat, he froze in horror as the full picture unfolded before him. From Den's mouth hung a slimy black tentacle from a crevice. Writhing and pulsing, it latched onto the hollow between Yana's collarbones on her neck. Pale and lifeless, the girl lay at the bottom of the boat under Den's twisted posture, while the creature greedily sucked blood from her with powerful gulps. No, no, Martin gasped. Two desires warred inside him: to rush to Yana's aid, or to run away as far as possible from the nightmare creature destroying the commune's inhabitants one by one. Martin chose the latter. He stepped back. As if sensing his gaze, Den turned around. The creature, with a wet smack, detached from Yana's neck and curled in the same direction Den was looking. His heart pounded fiercely against his ribs. Frozen in place, Martin watched in horror as Den, without taking his glazed eyes off him, climbed out of the boat. The creature dangled from his mouth, its head stretched forward, bristling with rows of tiny teeth. Martin took a step back but caught his foot on a snag and clumsily fell onto the sand. He didn't even have time to blink when Den flew at him, knocking him onto his back, pinning his outstretched arms to the ground so he couldn't move. Martin tried to kick Den away but failed. The creature coiled like a spring, then swiftly lunged into Martin's terrified, wide-open mouth. The elastic, slimy tentacle slid over his tongue and palate, screwing into his throat and esophagus, leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. His vision instantly darkened as if his eyes were ripped out with flesh, and Martin disappeared into a black abyss of oblivion. Martin came to. His ears buzzed slightly, and his throat ached with a bitter taste, as if he had swallowed smoke from a fire. It seemed nothing had changed. He still had 2 hands, 2 legs, and a head on his shoulders, and he could move all limbs easily. But Martin knew something new dwelled inside him. Hungry for fresh sensations and emotions dissolved in blood like the most desirable drug. The creature living inside Martin sought pleasure. It sampled several tastes, searching for the one it liked best. Finally, it settled. Martin's blood had a special sweetness. His cowardice thrilled the creature, filling it with joy, strength, and a desire to seek more. Martin stood and looked around. Den, his mouth smeared with black slime, lay in the reed thickets, quietly moaning. An exhausted product, he would die within a few hours, just as Osmond and Lika had died before him. Yana lay at the bottom of the boat, her eyes frozen, with a grotesque wound on her neck, blossoming like a bloody flower. Her blood held too much sympathy, and its taste displeased the creature. Martin approached the water's edge and stared into the distance. There, on the other side of the river, lived people. Many people. They were full of emotions and feelings. Joy, sorrow, pleasure, longing, triumph, anger. The creature inside shuddered in anticipation.